Thanks for joining us. I don't know, I think our 12th show, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm going to normally when we do these, we have an interesting guest and we talk about that guest and we really highlight that person. Today's show's a little bit different, and we're going to kind of flip this around a little. Um, before I introduce our guest, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. Um, so we've been doing these shows now for about a month and a half now. Um, uh, and it's been, the audience is growing, which is great. We're super excited about that. We're grateful to our community for being a part of that. Um, and I think we have some big stuff coming up in January. I think we have um, at least one new element and maybe two new elements. So very, very happy about that. Um, and then, uh, you know, what we've done so far, I'm going to spend an awful lot of time on tonight, so I don't want to take up our time here. But I think there's going to be some pretty cool stuff coming up in the February, March, April timeframe. So just kind of stick with us. It's going to be, as always, as you'll hear tonight, it's been a bumpy ride so far, but I think there's some interesting stuff coming here soon. So with that, I know it's all a teaser, but I just want to say thanks for everybody being a part of this. With that, I'm going to kind of turn this over to Rachel. Um, she came to me about 3 weeks. I'm guessing a lot of you who are tuning in are coming in through LinkedIn. We've had a lot of success with our LinkedIn channel over the last couple weeks. Um, and she's an independent journalist that is writing her own um uh, newsletter, Substack. It's nextdawn.substack.com. And I'll post that in the chat here in a moment. Um, and what she asked for was an interview to interview me about my experiences with Liftport for her newsletter. And it what turned out, like, we started having conversations and we had some more conversations and we had some more conversations. And in fact, she's still going to continue keeping her Substack account going. But what we decided to do jointly is for her to kind of continue her role as a journalist, but within the context of Liftport, to be part of our team, to be part of the Better Futures team. And so she has begun writing um, synopsis narratives on our guests, on our speakers. So she's just finished one with Roger Lanius last week, and she's working on another one for James Burke from Monday night, and Robert Zubrin. So I guess that's three of them now. And so that's going to go and sit side by side with the rest of our content. So we're building out some pages for our Better Futures. So we'll have the video, we'll have a transcription, we'll have a description, and then Rachel's synopsis. And we'll also use those synopses for part of our social media and marketing to kind of promote the shows itself. So I'm really glad that Rachel reached out the way that she did, and that we were able to chat and kind of turn this into kind of a more ongoing thing. But remember, she started this as an independent reporter, so I'm going to turn the rest of the whole show over to her, and she's going to start asking me questions. What we agreed to do was I would do the interview for her just exactly like she wanted, not pulling punches, the good days and the bad days. But I was going to do it on camera for this community because this is mostly an unknown, untold story. There are pieces, lots of people have parts of it, but since I was the only one there for the whole time, I'm kind of the only one that has the whole story. So With that, I'm going to turn this over to Rachel and let her ask her questions. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks, Rachel. It's all you.
Thank you again, and thank you for the opportunity, Michael. I very much appreciate it. So, as he mentioned, tonight is kind of about Liftport's origin story, like what a space elevator actually is, how you came to be creating this. Just kind of take us back to the very beginning, even before you made this like a actual established business.
Okay. So it's strange, but it actually starts way back, and I'm gonna condense about 30 years into about 3 minutes. But when I immediately got out of the Marine Corps, I was a Marine for my first 4 years out of high school. I had a captain who taught me investment management, which was a pretty strange skill to go from crawling through the mud to a shirt and tie. That was a pretty big leap for me. And my captain taught me investment management. So my first job out of the Marine Corps was for an investment house. And while there, my then boss, who I really admired, he asked me to do an analysis, a research paper on energy, just global energy. And I worked on it for a long time, a couple months. And he kept asking me about it, and I kept kind of blowing him off because I didn't like the answer. And I finally came clean with him. I'm like I got to throw this thing in the trash because it doesn't work. What it says is that we're already out of energy, and this is a report that I put together back in 1991 or 1992, and I thought I had just failed. I thought I had just failed as an analyst trying to understand this problem of global energy, and my boss just kind of shrugged his shoulders, and that was the end of it. But I wish that the 55-year-old version of me could go back to the 22-year-old version of me, 23-year-old version of me, and look at that paper again, because that has stuck with me for a really long time. And it was because of that. Fast forward, went off to Boston University for a while, went off and started my first company, an internet company, back in 95. I bought some real estate in 95. And by the time 2001 rolls around, the internet company is closed. I'm in a spot in my early 30s where I'm kind of figuring out what I want to do. The real estate company's done well. And I kept thinking back to when I was in high school. I was interested in space. Over all this time, whether it was an internet company or doing analysis on infrastructure for my bosses, and even my time in the Marine Corps, that always kind of pointed me towards advanced technology and my own interest in space. So all the science fiction stuff behind you is mostly space stuff. And so in my early 30s, I'm kind of trying to figure out, what do I want to do when I grow up? And, I have the advantage of the building to kind of give me cash flow. And I'm like, what do I want to do? And it came back to space. And so my first job in space was to start working with a guy. His name is Ralph Nansen. He died a couple of years ago. He was a Boeing engineer and a NASA engineer. And he was a part of a space-based solar power project. So space-based solar power. Imagine here's the world. You've got geosynchronous satellites above each of the major cities of the world. You could beam power captured from the sun, beam it back down to the ground, and provide clean, green, limitless energy to everyone, everywhere, all the time. So you could power 40% of the global population with clean energy if you could harness space-based solar power. So I was all into that. I was excited about that. And then the reality of, we don't have the rocket capacity to build that. It's expensive. The technology is there, but the logistics capacity, the launch costs. It doesn't, as the phrase is, the business case doesn't close. And so that was the end of it. But that's what started me down this path of thinking about the elevator. My former business partner, Brad, Dr. Edwards, he reached out to me and he's like, hey, here's this thing. And I'm like, nope, that's all science fiction. I don't want to talk about the space elevator. And he's like, no, really, it's real. And it's not hyperbole to say that a lunch and a dinner with Edwards changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. So that was pretty wild. That was pretty amazing, actually. So what's a space elevator? So imagine you have a ball and a string, spinning it over your head. The string in the middle stays straight, right? All right. So now let's expand that to an Earth-sized system. You have a counterweight deep out in space with an extraordinarily long, strong string. The mechanics are the same. The string stays straight. And if you have that, you've effectively built a ladder that you can climb back and forth into space on. And so that's the big idea. And that idea has been around for more than 100 years.
So it works like a cable car, sort of.
It does. It does almost exactly in the sense that the cable car is moving the wire and the car is trapped on the wire. This is a fixed asset on the ground of Earth, and the centripetal acceleration of the world keeping the string straight. So this is a pretty, it's a fixed asset, but it moves, right? From the ground up, it moves. There's a lot of things that move it, but it does work a lot like that. And what you'd have is you would have lifters, we called them lifters, to climb back and forth up and down the space. And I'll show you some examples over here. The tall, long, thin thing over there, that's a robot that climbed a mile into the sky. So we had balloons tethered to the ground with robots climbing back and forth. And then that robot, there's a guide system on the top and bottom, a tread system in the middle, a little bit of cargo, some brains, computers, and communications, and that's the climbing mechanism. And we got pretty good at that, but I'm a little ahead of my story here. So when we were working with Brad, I was never actually at NASA. That's an important distinction. Edwards had a research contract under NIAC, NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts. And I was the second person on that. So it was him and I most of the time. He was there for about a year and a half before me. And then I was there for the final year and a half or so. So his first grant was like $70,000 as a phase one. I came on when he had the phase two at $500,000. And I was pretty skeptical in the beginning. I remember meeting him. It probably was around October 2001, but I didn't really start working on this until maybe March 2002. I was around it. I was doing stuff with it prior, but I hadn't really committed to it until then. I still had to close down my internet company and stuff like that. So, in the beginning, it was a little bit of flirtation. I wasn't quite married to it just yet. And then, things go well, right? Edwards and I, I'm not like throwing anybody under the bus. This is a well-known piece. It made front page of the Seattle Times, but we didn't really get along very well. We didn't get along very well. We really approached the world from very different perspectives. He's a PhD in physics, so he wants an ordered universe. He wants to understand an ordered universe. And I'm a former finance guy, former U.S. Marine, former internet, company. We had 24 people in my internet company, so it was a pretty good sized company at the time. So I kind of thrive in chaos. So we were definitely an oil and water mix, but we really contribute a lot to the project, right? Like he would tackle problems that you'd need a calculator and a spreadsheet for, and then I would tackle what I used to refer to as the fuzzy problems. So people, logistics, finance. Since then, I've added policy and governance to my bag of tricks. So we were pretty good together, and we got a lot of stuff done. So even though it was a bumpy, interpersonal relationship, we really accomplished quite a bit. And I would argue that if anybody anywhere in the world is talking about a space elevator in the last 20 years, it was because of the work that he and I did. Because other than that, it was just straight science fiction. So he pioneered some stuff. I pioneered some stuff. We pioneered some stuff together. So those were great days. We held the first International Space Elevator Conference, which was a pretty big deal. Again, we were in the paper, in the media all the time. It was actually pretty overwhelming. And then 2003 rolls around, and the Space Shuttle Columbia crashes, and he and I get in a giant argument. And we decide to close down the company. So that company was High Lift Systems. That was a long time ago. And that was a pretty kind of frustrating moment, right? Like to figure out, what do I do next? And I learned later that he had some pretty interesting backup plans that I was not included on. So that also leads to some of the animosity that we have towards each other. But at the time, I was kind of adrift, and I could go back to real estate because I was pretty good at it, and just keep my building. But my internet company had closed by that point, and so I was like, back to the question, what do I want to do? So that's when I created Liftport. It was actually in springtime 2001. So that was kind of our start. Those are fun days. Those were good days. We traveled a bit. That was great. We went to the National Reconnaissance Office. We talked to DARPA. We talked to NASA a bunch of times. We'd go to different technical conferences. But, the idea of commercial space it hadn't found its feet yet. So that was still new.
When you say we, are you talking about your original team? So how did you put together like the first team for Liftport, like after you left from your last project?
Yeah, so that was it was really interesting. Again, going back to our skill sets, Brad had all the engineering, the math, the chemistry. I had all I call them megaphones. I had the press, the media, the few politicians that were interested. I had some of the military connections, and so we kind of his friends and his allies went with him, and my friends and my allies went with me. And I had a lot of business relationships. So, and I'd been in business a couple times, right? I'd had my building. I'd had my building for 6 years by that point. No, more than that. A lot more than that. I'd had my building for a long time. I'd had the internet company for a couple years. So I had some experience, and I just used my experience. So I knew that I could find other engineers, but he had a hard time finding other business people. So, he went one path and wound up working at a think tank group out in West Virginia. That didn't really work out very well for him or for them. I don't really know that whole story, so I don't want to speak to it. But he wasn't there all that long. But me, that's when I started Liftport. So what I started doing was taking a look at making it bite sized. Like, what could we actually work on? What could we actually tackle? So we worked on carbon nanotubes, because that was the key to this, right? If I'm talking about this extraordinarily strong string, well, that string doesn't exist. And, fun fact, 20 years later, it still doesn't exist, right? It still doesn't exist. There are some really good examples coming out of the UK that look very promising, but they're promising now, 20 years later. I had traveled, I must admit, I must have gone to 5 or 6 different schools looking for, I now refer to it as hunting Bigfoot, because everybody would say, "Oh, I've got the string, I've got this, super strong, arbitrarily long. I can make it, meters long, kilometers long." And I'm like, woohoo, I'm just jumping in an airplane and flying. And I'm not going to throw anybody under a bus, because this stuff is really hard, right? 20 years later, no one has figured out this string yet. Again, credit to some folks in the UK, because they look like it got something really promising. But I've seen promising, right? I went out to Columbia, I went out to Georgia Tech, I went out to Rice, UT Austin, I guess, not Rice. I went out to New Jersey Institute of Technology. Everybody at MIT. I mean, that's ultimately the partnership that we built was an alliance between some students at MIT and the National Renewable Energy Lab out in Colorado. Because here's the thing, everybody wanted to, because researchers need to publish first, they're not talking to each other, right? They're all siloed in their individual schools. But me, I want to build a space elevator. I don't care where it's coming from. So I'm talking to everybody. I'm talking to all the schools. And that was pretty exciting. There were some breakthroughs in some pretty unexpected places. I remember going out to Utah once, and I don't consider Utah to be a technology hub, but there was a guy in Utah who had some, honest to God nanotubes that looked really intriguing. So that's what we were working on. We wound up in this alliance where we were using some technology from MIT and some know-how from the National Renewable Energy Lab. And we were going to go out and build a factory, an actual carbon nanotube factory. At the time, it was the first of its kind. So it was pretty ambitious. In hindsight, it's pretty easy to say it was stupid, but I didn't know that then. And so we went out to Millville, New Jersey. They had some economic development interests. They had a history of specialty glass. So Corningware is out there and a bunch of other things. Glass and aluminum and things like that. And so what the idea was is we would take our carbon nanotubes, sprinkle them into glass, and make stronger glass. That was the plan, and it made sense on paper. That's all I can.
Almost like space plexiglass, like a container for the string, or
no, this wouldn't be the string yet. This wouldn't be the string. This would be making super small nanotubes. I guess that's a redundant sentence, but super small nanotubes. They're not big enough. They're not strong enough for the space elevator string, but they are commercially viable. They're useful in the world. And our idea was we'd build this this subsidiary that would focus on the nanotech. That would be a cash cow for the main idea of working on the elevator. So that's why we're going to build out a factory. And so even though the material wasn't good enough for an elevator, it was, we thought, certainly good enough to make stronger glass. So the idea was, imagine, and I'm really simplifying here, but sprinkle nanotubes into glass, and it's basically like rebar for glass. Okay, does that make sense? But it's so small that it doesn't really impact the visual look through the glass a little bit, a tiny bit, but it does reinforce the glass. So that was the idea. None of that worked. Not any part of that worked. Liftport back then was primarily, not entirely, but primarily self-funded through my real estate assets. We did have some investors, so I'm super grateful to those folks. But the bulk of it came out of my own checking account. The building was basically an ATM. It would spit out new money every month, and I would use that money to build my team. And so at some point, depending on which year we're talking about, we had between 9 and 14 people. Some combination of full-time, part-time, volunteer, intern, kind of the whole spectrum of people. And that was great. That was pretty effective. We did some really cool stuff there. But the nanotech stuff ultimately didn't work. I figure I put between $200,000 and $300,000 into it. And at some point, this is $2005, $6. So $200,000 to $300,000 then is probably worth $500,000 now, maybe even a little bit more. And so, nope, that's it. We're done. We're done doing that. I couldn't support it anymore. At which point we switched over to the robotics, and we did really well with the robotics, like looking at the mechanical processes of climbing. And so we built robots. We built. I think we're up to 19 robots all total. Some of them are really goofy. They're Legos. Some of them are robots that we built out of my best friend's garage. And some of them, like the one I just showed you, that's, again, 2005, laser cutting was brand new technology. It was brand new. So Microsoft Research was a really great ally of ours. And we would go into the MSR lab late at night when the engineers weren't around. They would give us access, and we'd use their equipment. So that robot got built at Microsoft Research. So hats off to those guys. And what did we do? We started out with robots that were just climbing up and down in the office, just from floor to ceiling. And then that's not enough. So we put this cantilevered arm out the window. It was my building, so I'm like, I'm going to do it. And then went down back and forth from the floor from the parking lot to the roof. And we did that for a while. And Neil deGrasse Tyson came out, and Neil deGrasse Tyson came out, and he made some pretty funny jokes about our space elevator. So that was pretty neat. That was a highlight.
He made jokes about it, but all in good fun, right?
All in good fun. Yeah. No, he's publicly said the math works for the elevator, but nothing else does. Right. And I think he's right about that. Right. I've definitely changed my own tune on this. But NASA at the time was running a competition. I'd say there were 15 teams around the country and up in Canada that were all competing at different times. This is probably over a 5-year period. Liftport didn't, because we helped create the rule set, and we helped petition to NASA to start the Centennial Challenges. So we didn't compete, but people who used to work for me, friends, allies, they actually started teams, and one of those teams won $900,000. So good for them, right? Yep, good for them. They're still in business. It's been 15 years. They're still in business. So really amazing work that they're
The
doing.
name, you want to drop that in the chat?
Sure. Let me look it up here for a second. Power. I've got the wrong link. I'll find it in a minute.
Right, but you said they won $900,000. This was in like 2006, 2007 money again, right? Or was this later on?
I think that was 2009. I think that came out in 2009. The company was called Laser Motive, and the guy's Tom Nugent. I'm going to actually try and get Tom on this show because he's got a terrific background, and he was so great working with me. I was really grateful and pretty humbled around him. He won't say I was humbled. Let's be clear about that. I'm not known for being humble, but great guy.
But you felt that way, like even if you didn't tell him that, that's how you felt, right?
Yeah, no, for real. I mean, he knows. I've been a fan of his for a long time. Yeah, Power Light. Here we go. Yeah, so their team actually won. It was a different company. It was called Laser Motive at the time. And then over time, they've gotten really, really good at power beaming. Just, here's a power source. We want the energy to be over here. How do we get it? And, I've kind of lost track of what their company does exactly, but they've done power over Ethernet, which is pretty cool tech. And they've kept a drone in the air for 24 hours straight just by powering it from the ground. So pretty neat stuff, right? And so all of that came out of the NASA competition, the Centennial Challenges. But this is kind of where our story starts taking a not so cool turn. 2005, 6, and 7, we're building all those robots, and I think life is good. I am very happy with how this is going. We've gone down. We've probably had 4 or 5 meetings with the FAA. We've had a bunch of meetings, probably 5 or 6 meetings with the U.S. Navy, specifically the Weather Directorate down in Monterey. And I think we're going to get a contract from the Navy. So imagine you've got this balloon. It's tethered to the ground. I always draw it as an angle because the ribbon's always at an angle because of wind. But the idea is we could put sensors all the way up and down the ribbon, and then a camera system and a communication system at the top. And so that becomes what we refer to as tethered towers. And I thought we were really, really close to a contract with the Navy. So I did something I don't regret, and I don't want to undo that time in my life. But I actually, not figuratively, I actually bet my mortgage on that project. And so wound up in foreclosure on the building, but I was pretty sure we were going to get this contract for the Navy. So I'm like, it'll be fine. And then one day it wasn't. And then I lost the building, and then the company crashed. And that's the end of kind of phase 1 of the story. There's a whole lot more to this story. But we did some amazing things up until that, right? We climbed as high as a mile. That test was only a few hours, call it 6 hours. And we call that HA, high altitude. And then we had done a different test for 60 days at only 300 feet, LE, long endurance. So we were building what we called HAIL, high altitude long endurance, where we take the high altitude technology and partner it with the long endurance technology, which surprisingly is not the same, right? How do we get those to work together? And so that's where I was betting on the agreement with the Navy, and it didn't work. So 2007, everything craters and it ends pretty fast, and it's pretty ugly. And I do not miss those days. I'm glad they are over. But the early side of it was pretty good. Now, it's been 15 years. A lot has happened in those 15 years. But that's the early side of the story. Any questions about that?
So it kind of crashes like overnight, and you said there's been 15 years that goes by. Like, what is like the evolution from that first phase to kind of like when you're laying low and then you launch again, like that transition era?
I did a lot of stuff. Call it what it is. I was super depressed. I was so angry. I did a lot of stuff that ultimately was not very satisfying. I worked up in. I immediately went to Greece. It was supposed to be for a week, and I was there for 5 months, working for the Greek. It was the Ministry of Finance was like my boss's boss's boss. And they were doing some really cool stuff to kind of try to figure out if they could build a deep tech focused venture capital community in Greece. Turns out you can't. 15 years ago, if you remember, that was the beginnings of their economic crisis that lasted for about 3 years. Their country, a third of their country caught on fire. That's not hyperbole. A third of their country caught on fire, and that ruined much of their kind of economic wealth, especially the farming. And the Greeks were really embarrassed on the public stage for not being good managers of their wealth. But a third of it caught on fire, and I don't think that's fair. But when that happened, my boss got fired, and his boss got fired, and his boss got fired. So there was no way they were going to entrust, this stuff with an American outsider. So it was time for me to go home. So I did that. I went to Greece for a while, came back, wound up going up to. That's when I went to International Space University. So 2008, I went to ISU for the summer. That was terrific. 2009, I went up to Canada, worked on a different venture capital project that also didn't work, and worked on a space-based power company. So I was super excited about that. That also didn't work. And then it wasn't until about 2010, 11, 12, I start kind of getting my feet back under me. My mom falls. She cracks a vertebra. So I wound up moving home unexpectedly to help her in her recovery. And I was just bored. I was bored because I wasn't really working. I was really kind of trying to take care of her. And wound up, but by this time I'd switched over to the lunar elevator. ISU helped me convince me to work on the lunar elevator, move away from the Earth system. And I've never regretted that switch. I mean, I still hope that the Earth elevator is constructed by somebody. I don't think that's going to happen. Not anytime soon for sure. But the lunar elevator is constructible now with current technology, and that was kind of like my beacon of hope, right? When during some very dark days, I call them the zombie days of Liftport, because it was an idea, but it wasn't really a company. It wasn't really a thing that had legs. So but the idea of this mythical, magical elevator in the sky, like it wouldn't die. And so I kept working on it. And I'll tell you, I'm a terrible employee, because I don't want to do anything except work on building space infrastructure. So all of those projects I worked on, they were just placeholders. But ISU helped me understand that the lunar elevator was worth the effort. For me, it was a litmus test of whether I go back into finance, go back into real estate, go back into investment management, or whether I should stick with space. And that was a hard decision, because I was wealthy one day and the next day I wasn't, right? So the idea of deciding to be economically less well off to pursue something that I cared about, that was a hard decision, and that decision still impacts me even now, even today. I went from a net worth of $1.7 million to negative 600,000 in 24 hours. So, right, that's a hard thing to adjust to, and hence the anger and depression, right? So those days were really tough. But then then my mom gets injured, and I'm home, and I want to work on the elevator, but I'm kind of stuck. And so, without a lot of planning and a lot of forethought, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go do a Kickstarter. Right? This sounds like a good idea to me, right? It sounds like a good idea to me. But I asked for $8,000. We're more than halfway. No, we're not. We're about $3,000 on day one. Day two, we're probably north of 4 or 5. So I was really happy about that. It's only a 21-day campaign.
Well, it just kind of exploded unexpectedly. Like you were expecting, this is just an experiment, and it just took off.
Right. Well, no, I don't want to sound ghoulish or taking advantage of a situation, but coincidentally, Neil Armstrong died that week. And so there's all these articles around the world. First man on the moon dies. And in the bottom paragraph, they're like, here's a funny little gimmick of a Kickstarter trying to go to the moon, right? And then, so we get like one line in an article about Armstrong. And then over the next couple of weeks, the celebrity status fades, but we start getting our own articles about the elevator. So it just turns into wildfire. It goes everywhere. On the last few hours of the campaign, we held a virtual party, right? There's like 5 of us. I'm at my mom's place, and I got my Coca-Cola, and we're like, woohoo, because we crossed $100,000, and it was amazing. And then I go to bed, and the clock ticks down, and in those last like 5 or 6 hours, it got another $10,000. So it ended at 110,000. And on every metric that you would normally use, it's a giant success, right? You ask for 8,000, you get 110. I feel like a hero, right? It was a disaster. It was a disaster from day one, from the moment that thing crossed over. I didn't price any of the rewards correctly. I didn't calculate in shipping. I'm like, it'll be fine. How bad could shipping be, right? Shipping cuts into 20 to 30% of the rewards. 20 to 30%. I didn't know that. Like, here I am thinking I'm super smart, like I can build an elevator on the moon, but apparently I can't figure out shipping rates to Australia, right? And so because it became a global project, it became global shipping, right? So I totally misfigured all of the numbers for the product. And then real disaster started, because I started working on the actual robot. So the goal, the task of the Kickstarter was to do something we had already kind of done, which is build a robot to climb string. And but we changed our design. Instead of a flat ribbon, which all those robots are designed to climb, because the lunar elevator is a different architecture than the Earth elevator, we're like, okay, we're gonna figure out how to climb a string. And that was surprisingly challenging. Now, everybody who's watching this is going to be like, the sailing industry has been doing it for millennia. You wrap it around, super easy, except that that's what we call a cheater solution, because all the wraps around a thing, that puts tension on the string in a way that's unrecoverable, and that breaks the string, and we can't break the string. So we have to figure out how we can climb something with only minimal, I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I can do this very well.
Like tug. Like it's
Yeah.
not supposed to pull on
So it would serpentine through instead of wrap around. And so we're like, oh, how hard could this be? This isn't a big engineering problem. Turns out it's a super difficult engineering problem for my team at the time. Pardon me, sorry. So I start working on the robot and think the rewards will take care of themselves. That doesn't happen. The rewards are way more expensive. The robot doesn't work. We spend $7,000 on string, and nothing works. Nothing works. And so I get vilified. Like, fast forward 6 months, a year, I'm doing the work, but it's not working. And Rachel, you and I will share stuff offline of photos and pictures and all that stuff, because I want that's one of the reasons I want you on our team to kind of document the stuff, right? Because I was, between the first crash of Liftport and then this, failed Kickstarter, I looked pretty bad, right? Reputationally, I looked pretty bad. And so that was the end of it. I kind of stayed below the radar for a couple more years. And it wasn't until 2017 that I reemerged. I think the phrase you keep using is breaking from the cocoon. That's your phrase? Yeah.
Yeah, you go dormant and then you go through some kind of metamorphosis and
yeah. So that feels pretty good, actually. So 2017 rolls around. That's when I officially restart the company. It got pretty bad. I was driving for Uber for 5 years. Like, nobody wants to do that, but nobody wants to do that for 5 years, right? Yeah, it was pretty rough. Those days were really rough.
But you came out of it. Like, what inspired you to go back, like in 2017?
I just couldn't let it go, right? I knew I was right. Nobody was really looking at the moon the same way we were, right? Now, with Artemis, lots of people are looking at the moon. But in 2017, it was kind of a new idea. So let's talk about that. So we talked about the Earth system. That's a centripetal elevator using centripetal acceleration from the Earth. That's the Earth elevator, okay? The lunar system doesn't work like that. The lunar space elevator infrastructure, it's different. So you've got the Earth on one side. You've got the moon way far out, right? It's a little over 250,000 miles, 285,000 miles. But about here, it's the Lagrange point. It's the Earth Moon Lagrange one. There are 5 Lagrange points. We're not going to talk about the other 5. This one is the gravitational middle between the Earth and the Moon. It's not the physical middle, right? Because if you're here, you're just going to get pulled back to Earth, right? So you're far enough from the Earth and far enough from the Moon that you're in kind of a gravitational equilibrium. But that's not true because the Moon wobbles. They call it perturbation. It's about 30,000 kilometers. And instead of being kind of a perfect circle, it's an oval orbit around the world. And so that L1 point, it moves too, right? Every time the moon, as the moon is moving, the Lagrange point is moving. So you can pinpoint it mathematically, but it's not a stable position. At least L1, 2, and 3 are not stable. L4 and 5 are, different reasons. And so what we thought was, okay, we're going to take a rocket out from the Earth. Take a rocket out from the Earth, get to the Lagrange point, drop a string down to the surface of the Moon, pull it back through the Lagrange point towards the Earth, not touching the Earth. You're still a long ways from the Earth. But now you've got Mother Earth's gravity trying to pull on the counterweight, and that keeps the string straight. So the mechanics are still the same. You're still grabbing onto the edges of a string and climbing back and forth. But the thing that keeps it working, centripetal acceleration for the Earth elevator, gravitational, it's a gravitational elevator versus a centripetal elevator.
So it kind of pulls it in place where it stays put because it's kind of floating between the two.
Right. It's floating, but it's attached on it's attached on the lunar surface. It is attached there. But because gravity is a pretty weak force, the longer the string, here's the world. The longer the string, I mean, there's talk about a string that almost touches. That's not going to work. We're not going to do that. But there's talk about that. But the longer you are towards the Earth and the bigger your counterweight towards the Earth, the more tight that ribbon stays. And here's the thing. When we first started doing this, we were all focused on we're all focused on just soft landing on the lunar surface, right? You take a rocket from the world, get out to the Lagrange point, take a robot down to the surface of the Moon. That's a really gentle way to land on the Moon. And it's so much easier than what Armstrong and Aldrin did, what Artemis is going to do with a landing that's propulsion based. And we thought we could do heavy cargo all the time that way. So that was really cool. Fast forward, times change. There's a lot of rocket missions heading to the Moon right now. By the way, they're going to do a lot of, I'm going to use the word ecological damage, but that's definitely the wrong word. They're going to spray a heck of a lot of debris up every time they land. That's going to be a problem. That's going to be a serious problem. What you don't want to do is land anywhere near the Apollo 11 landing sites and sandblast Armstrong's footprints. Right, so that would be bad. We would not like that. We were really focused on soft landing on the Moon, but then over time, what we realized was, this spot where you've got, you've got Earth's gravity here, and you got the Moon's gravity on this side. That this becomes what we told the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force. It becomes the fort at the top of 2 hills. From a military perspective, that's a really intriguing idea, right? The fort at the top of 2 hills. And what does that mean? It means It's a really long time to get from Earth to the Lagrange point. And you've got control over on this side of access to the moon. So what you wind up with if you stabilize with the string is you can build a really, really big space station, a really big space station, vastly larger than anything that's been contemplated so far. And that's really exciting, right? And so I think that Lagrange point station is really the key to the moon. It's the key to the solar system. When humans build ships that go to Mars regularly, we're going to build it at that site. When we build ships that go to other stars, we're going to need a shipyard. That's going to be the Lagrange point station. We're going to harvest metals and materials from the lunar surface. We're going to pull those up to the Lagrange manufacturing site, turn those into space-based solar power, and we're going to come full circle and power the world with resources we've pulled for the moon.
Right. So it acts kind of like it ties all the business models together, and that's kind of where you are today is building something into the big picture.
Yeah, exactly. Pardon me. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. So that's, and you asked a minute ago, like, why keep going? I mean, if you have that idea and it just keeps gnawing at you, it's really hard to give that up, right? It's really hard. I can't tell you how many times friends and family have basically said the equivalent of, why don't you get a real job? But if that's where you want to go, you're not going to get pushed off that target very easily. So, yeah, it might have been bumpy here and there, but that's the plan. That's where we're going, and that's what we're doing. In 2018, gosh, 5 years ago, we wound up going out and meeting with. He was then the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force. He's now the chief scientist. Sorry, he was then the chief scientist of Air Force Space Command. This is his challenge coin. I leave it on my desk. And we really surprised him. His name is Dr. Joel Mosier. He's a terrific guy. But we went and we did what they call a Tech Rats meeting, a technology readiness meeting. And when we presented, there was like 5 of us on our team. There were 12 of them on their team. It was Air Force Academy, Aerospace Corporation, 2 spooks that wouldn't give their name or affiliation. They just wouldn't be named in that environment. And, we presented our stuff and I mean, he was genuinely surprised, right? He was genuinely surprised. He's not in the position to endorse or authenticate. That's not his role, but we've gotten to be pretty good friends and allies. And that really gave me, I would say, some of the courage to keep going. And that's what we're trying to get back to, right? When 2020 happened, we came pretty close to going out of business. And so we started doing these. We started doing conferences as a service. We did 27 conferences. We have 500 speakers. We have 300 or 400 hours of YouTube content. And that was just to keep cash flow going so we could stay focused on working on the elevator. And it's only been in the last maybe 2 months or so that we've really started thinking about how can we get back to working on the elevator. So that's why I say springtime, February, March, April, might have some cool stuff to say. But that's what I'm hoping we do, right, is we get back to working on that. Still going to keep doing these events, still going to keep doing the podcasts, the conferences. That's been our bread and butter for a while now, and so we're not gonna kill our cash cows. But yeah, I want to get back to working on the elevator right now that things are, I won't say normal, but on the new normal. So.
Right. So they're kind of at like a stable place to have that transition to building from again.
Yeah.
Right. We've kind of come to the end of our regular programming time. So I just wanted to ask, is there any like final words that you have about where we're going in the future, like what you hope to see? Like, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I mean, I've taken the whole hour of the clothing thoughts, so I'm gonna probably bypass that. I am excited. I know that there were some bad days and some good days in there, but I really am excited about kind of what happens next. There's 2 people we're trying really hard to hire. If we get one of them, he gets us back on the hardware side of building stuff for space, and if we get the other, he's going to help on the financing side of this project. So both of those things are pretty darn important. And then we've got a great team, right? We've got you, we've got Leah and Taylor and Fabio and Yusuf and the new intern Jin. And as a set, like, I'm pretty happy with where we are and what we're doing. I live and die based on spreadsheets. I'm really happy with where our spreadsheets look like right now, and so it gives me hope and a little bit of enthusiasm for spring next year. So yeah, things are good. I think.
This is going to be an exciting year. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I had like so much that I learned from this conversation.
Terrific. Thanks for reaching out, right? I appreciate that. And, for all the folks watching on LinkedIn, we're grateful to have y'all as participants and audience, because you've opened up some cool doors in the last couple of weeks. So, all right, Rachel, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.